Early in the 1980s, Neil Tennant, one half of Pet Shop Boys but then a music journalist for Smash Hits, was having a conversation with his close friend about the new disease, AIDS, which had begun claiming the lives of young gay men in New York and San Francisco. His friend predicted that the disease wasn't set to have the same impact in the UK, that it couldn't happen here. 3 years later, that friend was diagnosed with HIV. His name was Christopher Dowell. He was beaten in a homophobic attack by his neighbours and died at the end of the decade. This goes some way to explaining the climate into which Pet Shop Boys made their 1988 film, It Couldn't Happen Here. The title track was written by Tennant following Dowell's diagnosis. Like a lot of Tennant's writing at the time, it's indelibly shaped by the AIDS epidemic, infusing it with an anger, nostalgia, and a deep sadness that I find profoundly moving as a listener. How do you balance the pain of losing friends, of being a gay man during the AIDS epidemic, with being a pop star at the peak of your powers? By 1987, when work on this film began, Pet Shop Boys had enjoyed a succession of hits, even a Christmas #1 single. What they decided to do next was to make one of the strangest things that a group could do at the peak of their powers. Originally planned as a series of music videos with a narrative, once the group recruited the director Jack Bond, the project began to take a darker, much stranger turn. Jack Bond had made documentaries with people like Salvador Dali and Werner Herzog, as well as a series of highly experimental, often disturbing films with his wife, the feminist writer Jane Arden. Following her suicide in 1982, Bond had those films withdrawn from release. Like Derek Jarman, with whom the Pet Shop Boys also collaborated, Bond was a singular figure intent on creating a new kind of British cinema. It Couldn't Happen Here is, for the most part, a meditation on Englishness, and I do mean specifically Englishness. It's easy to look at some of the imagery, saucy postcards, carry-on stars, and be feel that you're watching the cartoon jingoism of Britpop half a decade later. This is something else entirely, something that examines the problems of England that still stalk us to this day. It's comic, but it's never funny. Not really. Both Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe grew up in seaside towns, and the first half of the film is a sort of impressionistic autobiography of that childhood, shot on location in the Essex coastal town of Clacton. The seaside is quickly painted as a vector for the various neuroses of England: xenophobia, denial of pleasure, knee-jerk prejudice, sexual repression, mistrust of outsiders, mistrust of anyone really. The song It Couldn't Happen Here, performed twice in the film, voices Tennant's fears that the AIDS epidemic may lead to a greater persecution of gay people. It's no surprise that Tennant was focused on the nastiness barely below the surface in British culture and British public life. It's worth noting too that in 2014, Clacton became the first British constituency to return a UKIP MP. Tennant's Catholic upbringing is also important. An altar boy who could recite the Mass in Latin from the age of 8, Tennant returned regularly to religious themes, most notably in the #1 single, It's a Sin, perhaps the definitive Catholic guilt banger. For me, the images of Catholicism in the film are among the strongest. The strange, unsettling image of the murderous priest surrounded by children, the nuns in lingerie on Clacton seafronts. Suggesting the darkness in organised religion might be pretty commonplace now, but was sharply provocative in the 1980s. Still, it isn't all darkness. The dance sequences are terrific, choreographed by Arlene Phillips, later of Strictly fame. The soundtrack is made with songs in the first 2 Pet Shop Boys albums, simply excellent high-energy electronic pop songs about sex, Thatcherism and city life. These are songs such as Opportunities, What Have I Done to Deserve This, Always on My Mind, even a glorious hip-hop version of West End Girls. When the film was released in 1988, it was met with confusion from the public and indifference from the critics. Ever the astute pop stars, Pet Shop Boys loved the film, but decided that this was not the hill they wanted to die on. The film was quietly ditched, not getting a proper home release until earlier this year. Now, 30 years on, it can be appreciated for what it is, a unique and visionary experiment in British cinema, and a strange and brilliant thing for a commercial pop group to do. It's testament to a group who have always pushed for pop music to incorporate ideas larger than themselves, and in doing so, tapped into something important in the British psyche, something that still resonates strongly today.